Alright, so I'm gonna create like a little mini series about kind of the VSTs that I use a lot. There's some VSTs that I use a lot, obviously, and then there's some that I've just discovered. And a lot of the times, if it's a VST that I really use, I'll pay for it. But I like to use like the demo versions as a way to kind of test to see like, okay, am I actually using this? Or is it something that I saw on some YouTube video or read in the magazine and I'm like, oh, that could really help. And actual, in fact, it doesn't really do anything apart from increase the volume. So one of the VSTs that I use a lot are transient shapers. Um, so a transient shaper is a really simple tool. It basically has a release and an attack. So if I use serum in this example, imagine that this is the attack, and that is how much you want to kind of boost or decrease the amount of attack that's there. So I think in audio language it's called attenuate the sound. So you can kind of boost this part here, and then this would be the sustain amount. So it's like doing that, and then the release, which is basically this. So um, imagine a sound is doing this, for example. Oops. So imagine a sound. So this would be basically this, which would be that. You can kind of see it here as well, and I'll put on the transient detection. This is a really good free scope or visualizer because it's got like spectrum as well that you can edit, and it's also got stereo field as well that you can kind of look at, and it's free. It's really good. So you can see here how it's kind of I can actually put this in the same place, yeah. So let's use it on this one. So imagine the attack is now up like this, and then it has a long release. You can see how it looks like this now. It looks like a bit of a snare, doesn't it? But you can see how it is. Is there a way to freeze this? No, I have to press the key. You can see how here. Oh, I don't know, like, trying to get a good snapshot. There we go. So you can see how here the release is releasing, and then the attack is quite high. That's why I have this thing in red, because it's saying that there's multiple attacks because it's white noise. It's detecting transients all over this spectrum. And so now if I was to change it and it would look like this, then this is basically doing that. And then if I turn this off and do another one, you can see now how it's kind of stopped that release. So it's stopped in its path. And then with the attack, if I turn it down, which is taking this part here and then moving it down, it rises kind of up like it's doing there as well. And that's pretty much what a transient shaper will do. But if I put this on full volume, for example, and I do the same thing, you can kind of see it here. So that's doing that. Let's put a bit of transient, and this is kind of stopping it. I mean, it's quite hard to see like this, but if I do it like this, you'll be able to see it. See how it's changing, just like what I was showing earlier. And that's what I use transient shapers for. It's really good at controlling transients. For example, in this snare drum that sounds like this. I'm gonna turn off the white noise. So this snare drum here, if you wanted to edit it, you could also just go into the actual waveform and slice it up and say, okay, I only want that amount, and then get a volume, do some volume automation, and then have this kind of peak out. Or if it's like that as well, you could always just go into the actual audio file and then just do an automation curve like that, and then do this, and it's a similar thing, and it still gives you that like kind of out rather than this, which kind of stops abruptly. But with a transient shaper, what you can do is that you can just do that, and you can modulate this as well, so you can just have it within the program itself. So that's like with a large transient here, no transient, little release, and a lot of transient, which is what I like to use quite a lot. So I use this on like a lot of my drums and a lot of my snares. And over here I've got quite a lot of different transient shapers that I apply on depending on what I'm using. And some of them are really complicated to use and they come with a lot of features. But I feel like even your standard one that comes in your DAW is good enough. The one that comes with Steinberg, I think it's called Envelope Shaper. There's a multi-band version and then there's a single band version. It does exactly the same thing. So in this situation, we have this sustain amount here, right? So we can control this amount here. So if you look at it, it's basically doing this. So you can do this, and then from this, you can control the length of this as well. So it's quite good. And then doing this, we've basically done, I don't know if this will respond. We've basically just done that kind of thing. Oh, it looks like that, doesn't it? Something like that, but it's just completely squared off. And that's pretty much how it is. And there's a multi-band version as well, which does exactly the same thing. It's basically envelope transient shaping. So this is what I basically do with this. And if I do it this way, it means I can control the different bands. So if you take a listen to, let me get something that has a lot of frequencies. So let me. This has got quite a lot of frequencies going on in it. So the way this one works is it's similar thing. You've got the attack, the length again, and then the release amount. And what this does is that it allows you to kind of transient shape, I guess, the different frequencies. So that's a good way of kind of like getting stereo balance, because you may have a song that has all these frequencies, but then you may only want, the top end being extended with less attack, and then you want the mids to kind of have and then at the low end amount, you want that to be on the side signal, creating that kind of punch, and then the bottom, you want that to kind of be solid, but also quite attacky as well. Then you can have that, or you just want to kind of have certain frequencies come out, so you can do it that way, but also being tight, so you can kind of control that. So that's what I use this for. But effectively, it's the same thing. It's a transient shaper, and the sensitivity is just the amount that it responds to. So this is responding like that, but you can push it as much as you want, and then the output is the output. So yeah, that's one of the main VSTs that I use. Ones I would recommend is definitely Shack Audio. Shack Audio's been around for donkey's years, and it was a staple in drum and bass for a long time, until people discovered that they could just make their own kicks and snares using using a synthesizer, and then layering it with acoustic sounds to basically create newer sounding snares that no one had ever heard of before. And that's probably why a lot of people in drum and bass was like, oh my god, how do you make that snare? And it's like every single time you make a sound, it's completely different, and most of the time you have no idea how you actually made it. And most things that you do show people how to make comes out sounding shit because you may have spent a lot longer making a sound, or you just inspired in that moment. So when it came to chopping up breaks and things like that, the only way to get really clean transient on your breaks was to get a break. To basically get a break, and because it was full of like really horrible frequencies, and it was from a piece of vinyl, and production was getting a bit more serious. To clean up a break, you would pull it through like a transient shaper just to get the hits, And Shack Audio was one of those first ever kind of programs that kind of gave everyone the ability to do that. And then there was this overdrive mode, which made sure that it never went above 0, so you could really push, um, the way you were transient shaping and get a bit of grit as well. And then obviously, people discovered that transient shaping was pretty much envelopes. And I think it was Cubase 5 that was one of the biggest cracked copies, and in that, Cubase came with the multi-band envelope shaper, so you could then go like, okay, well, I don't have to just take the hits. I can just kind of decide which parts I want to emphasize, and then put in a bit of top end, remove the top end, get rid of all the top end crappy sounding sounds, and just make it nice and tight, and then just chop this up. You just bounce it out. Oh, actually, I don't want to do that. You just bounce it out, and then there you had it. You would just have these great one shots that you got from vinyl. That sounded really good, and if you look at the waveform, you can see here that some of the transients have basically reduced the way it's coming. So it would kind of swoop in, and then a lot of people realized that if you reverse that and put that to a snare, you would get this really big smack on your snare. And I think Spawn was doing that a lot back in the day. But yeah, so I use transient shapers to kind of shape sounds. Not so much if I do drums in synthesizers or on the peak. The reason why is because you have that within your VST, because they've come a long way, right? So now you can just decide on how you would do that within your your VST. But at the time when people were making drums and stuff like that, no one really understood what any of this stuff meant anyway. It was just experimentation. So if you just added a bit of white noise onto this, you can control the snare and create a semi sounding good, what would be referred to as a Nero snare, because it sounds awful, but at the same time it's kind of nice with a bit of bass. So you would kind of, there was a period when everyone went through the high pitch snare phase, which was really a bad time for drum and bass. But yeah, so now it's not something that you would do, but because you may have noticed that I use a lot of samples, I create my own samples that I either give away or use in other people's tracks or whatnot. So because I use my own samples and I've just got back into music after a while, I like to kind of, out of old habits, just create one shots from my own breaks and then re-edit them as well, like back in the day. And using a transient shaper really helps to kind of get that tight sounding hit, because I may have added some reverb. So a few good ones are Shack Audio. It's really good. It's not really a transient shaper, but the gate in Trash is really good, and there's no excuses for not having Trash. They're practically giving this program away for free now. Hopefully they bring out a Trash free. But you just whack up the gate on each there we go. And then through doing that, you can just crank it up. But I don't really use Trash this heavily, just because of the way that the attack in the release is not very fast. It tends to kind of have this swoop-in feeling that I don't like, and it creates a lot of distortion, which isn't great. You probably can't hear it now because the whole thing is distorted, but I don't like that kind of nasty. You can hear it there. Yeah, so I don't like that, and it's kind of slow. But Trash has got a really good gate slash, call it a transient shaper, but that's pretty much what it is. Another way, that's a good point. Like another way to kind of look at a transient shaper is basically like a bit of a gate. But you can attenuate, um, you know, those sounds, so you can get like the transient to hit, and you can kind of do it with a gate, but it's quite hard to control, and then you get a lot of distortion, and it's not as good. I mean, I use this if I find samples have a lot of like reverb and stuff like that I want to cut out, but then it messes up with the frequencies, and it's like really annoying. And because drum and bass is so fast, you need to have that in check, or it just builds up over time. But I'm trying to apply this to like all genres of music now. But yeah, some good transient shapers are the ones that come with your DAW. Or if you've got a gate, it could do the same thing, or an envelope. It's probably called an envelope. Another one, obviously, is the kilohertz transient shaper. It's really fat sounding. Like, you don't have to do much to get this to sound nice. Like, that's so nice. Got to love a bit of shack audio. Sorry, kilohertz. And then another kind of big heavy duty transient shaper that I use is transgressor, and transgressor is really good. I'm not going to try and explain what it does. There's a lot of videos that kind of cover this, but transgressor basically allows you to kind of split the sustain part and the transient part, and then kind of control the amount of gain on those individual parts. And it's really good at kind of gluing drums together. But it uses quite a lot of CPU. I mean, obviously right now it's going to be kind of fine, but you don't want to have like, 30 of these on each track, because it's probably not a good thing. So you can see the two different hits here. The reds is obviously the transient amount, and the blue is the amount of sustain, and then you can kind of blend between the two. Especially if you look at the scope here, and it's still finding transients, but this is good. One thing I like about this scope is that it basically tells you if your transients are too bloody loud, really. It's just like, look, you've gone overboard, you're going to kill someone's ears. So bring it back a bit. I really like this thing. Can't believe it's free. Yeah, so transgressor is really good. You can split. And another one I use is the one by Native Instruments, but not so much anymore because, there's a couple of things you need to know about transient shapers. The low end. If you transient shape a drum or anything, it will introduce a ton of low end, and it will introduce that after the fact. So when you use a transient shaper, you have to do something to kind of smooth out the low end. Don't put a transient shaper on something that has low end information, because it will just make it sound completely horrible. So if I was to transient shape this, it's introduced so much low end. It's quite hard to kind of see, but so I would always say, like, once you've introduced a transient shaper, just roll it off. So I don't know why it does that. You would think that it would stop the sound, but I think because a lot of these instruments are relying on like LFOs, like really low, slow, or really fast LFOs, they create like a build up of like low noise that you won't know it's there until you try and like place your drums together, and then you're trying to EQ and all of this, and you're like, why does my drum sound like the bottom end is not unified? And it's because your transient shapers are just introducing like crazy amounts of phasing and you know, low frequency noise rumble that's just causing havoc with your drums, and you try and raise the volume and you're like, okay, why am I peaking? My drums are not even that loud and they're not very clear. Why is that happening? It's because the transient shaper is basically just adding a ton of low end, especially the Shack Audio one. So always add like a low pass filter or an EQ cut to kind of get rid of that in you know, introduction of low end mud that will happen. I don't know why it happens. I haven't really read a book to kind of explain why it's happening, but I'm guessing it's something to do with the fact that when you try and do this to an EQ, it creates like that kind of weird low rumbling sound, you know, like that, you know, that sound. That's like weird, like you're in a kitchen or you're in a bathroom. So you have to like then, so imagine it was this, you would then need to get another EQ and just, but you know, it's kind of ruined that sound, and the reason why it's because of this. Sounds better. So yeah, you should definitely like kind of watch that when you're using it. Like, don't go too overboard with transient shaping, but it is a good way to get like really nice fat drums, and you know, especially on synths as well. If you apply it to a synth lead or a synth sound, you know, it really kind of brings out those sounds. And it actually sounds like that. It's a bit like something that OTT would do. It's like a similar sound to what OTT is doing, or Riser in Cubase. Like, not so extreme, but adding them together though, you know, it can create like interesting tonal sounds. So yeah, yeah, that's some transient shaping really, and it's just a really good way to kind of control dynamics. And I think even in a lot of like the way, like depending on how you set up your list, it will always be in a dynamics section because it's kind of like dynamic control. Another thing is I kind of like to put it on the side signal. I know that's a big no-no, you know, but I like to put like a bit of transient shaping on the side signal and kind of have that kind of left and right effect without having that left and right effect. It's quite, you know, if you know what I mean. But yeah, so that was a little video on transient shaping. You know, it's one of those things that you're better off kind of learning it yourself, and just being like, okay, this is what it does. But before I go, and I want to do this last, I should probably start writing some kind of structure before I jump on these videos. But this is the best form of that. I absolutely love this program. It is so good. You know, it does what it says. You know, it can absolutely destroy a sound, or it can make a sound just sound amazing by itself. And then you've also got your clicks as well, which is basically the start of the attack. So it will add something to kind of fill in this spot here. So imagine your drums are not like really pushing in, you can kind of fake it. So with this, similar thing, it splits the frequencies, and then you can just transient shape. But it does it in a much more nicer way, and the fact that you can add transients to the beginning and then adjust the pitch, you know, is really good. You know, it's really good. You know, and that just basically means that when you make crappy drums, and you're like, oh god, I really like the way it kind of sustains, but there's no transients on there. You can kind of use that to kind of add your transients, and using that with a combination of other transient shapers and you know EQ can really like make a drum sound like really full. But you know, it always works only in the context of a piece of music. And you know, I get making music is difficult. I haven't done music for ages, and you know, getting that inspiration. But you know, I like to kind of create sample packs and things like that, preset packs. And this is how I kind of do it. And I just thought I'd kind of create this little series to kind of show you or show anyone that's watching um, what I use. So in this video, it was basically about transient shapers and what they do and how to use them. Okay, bye bye.